So just as a way of introduction, this is a webinar intended for recipients of the Players First Survey Fund, which, as you know, is a membership survey fund that we launched earlier in the year. And Players First have developed a very sophisticated platform for you to be able to survey your membership. And alongside those surveys come quite a sophisticated method of reporting as well, to be able to glean some action points and answers from the responses of your club members. So today is really a chance for Amelia to run through an overview of some statistics that we've already collected from the responses that have come in so far, obviously all anonymized, and a sort of overview of kind of macro view of what's come in so far, but also a way of introducing a method of being able to glean some action points or take forward a series of priority points from the data that you receive. So what can data tell us about what priorities we might want to put in place in our club? What other questions might we want to ask? And what else to look for beyond the sort of face value data that we get. There are, as I mentioned, some reporting functions within the Players First survey. And there are some templates available within that, which I think Amelia is going to run through for you to be able to drop in your own data and then possibly take that onto a committee or a board that you might want to present that data to, and how best to kind of clarify that for them as well. As I mentioned, there's a Q&A. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. There's a Q&A function, so you can pop the questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll keep an eye on both of those. And what I'll probably do is just save those questions. Amelia may well answer them in the course of her running through the platform and the data. So I'll reserve those till the end, and anything that we haven't covered, I'll ask her at the end of the webinar. We don't anticipate this lasting any longer than about 35-40 minutes. And we will send out, as I said, a recording not only of this webinar, but of the previous onboarding webinar that Amelia did earlier in the year for those clubs that haven't yet launched their survey and are having just now considering how to activate. So I think Amelia, who is, by the way, regional manager for the UK of Players First, you're going to kick off with some kind of top line statistics and then take us into a little bit more into the detail of data. So off you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Morning, all. I've seen who's kind of in the participant list, and I have spoken to some of you, and it's been great to hear your feedback already. And I know that some of you are intending to launch, so I really hope that you can all find some use from today's session. I'd be happy to obviously answer the questions that come on today, but obviously once we're off this webinar, hopefully you'll be deep diving into your results views, and if anything else comes up in your investigations there, then please do let me know if you've got any queries or questions in a bit more detail. So as Francesca's mentioned, I thought it might be interesting to just share some top line stats of where we're actually at with responses across the Scottish Golf Support Fund and clubs that have taken that on. So this is an updated version of some of the stats that I did share back in June, which was when we had our onboarding webinar. And at that point, we'd seen a 59% response rate. We had 5 clubs that had launched by that point with just over 1,000 responses. The NPS at that time as well was plus 33. And as some of you are aware, any NPS score that's in the positive is a good score, because it can actually go down to minus 100. So if you're looking at a positive NPS score in your results view at the moment, then yeah, you're contributing to that overall NPS that we're seeing across Scotland. So as of this morning, sorry, let me just share a different view. So as of this morning, as I've said, we are currently seeing a slightly higher response rate. So From the 17 clubs that have now launched, the average response rate who have used the data collection function is now at 61%. And we've received over 4,000 responses now. And it might be interesting to hear that the majority of those responses have actually come from the month of October, if we look at the average across each month. The benchmark has slightly increased up to plus 43. And previously the Pro Shop had been the highest scoring area. That's actually dropped a little bit. And the booking and handicap service area is now the highest scoring service area. Just to add to those as well, and this is information that you can all access through your dashboard independently. On average, the membership seniority, 49% of members that have responded to the surveys have been members for 10 years or more. So this is by far the highest group of members that have responded to any of the surveys. Loyalty, which is, as you might have guessed it, intrinsically linked to that seniority, 66% of your members have said that they are likely to be a member at the club in 2 years' time. And only 14% of your members are saying no. But as a recent discussion I've had with the club, 14% is still something to work off, either to push more into the maybe category or more maybes into the yes category. So if you can think, if 14% represents 10 members and you have a £1,000 membership price, that's almost £10,000 that of your members that you could try and find out, okay, how can we try and push them into that maybes and actually save money and make money for the club. So it's quite important to look at that loyalty number. And just in terms of playing habits, and it might be one that you're already familiar with and know how your members play, but 40% have said that they play mostly on weekdays. So this is the highest category group of your members, with only 24% suggesting they only play on weekends. So it might be useful to know that if you're looking at where you can slot in more guests, where you can slot in more societies. But as I say, this is information that's all available by default on your results view. So that's all I wanted to share in terms of top line findings across Scottish Golf at the moment, and hopefully we can continue to update these and actually share where we're at in a few months' time as well. So what I'm going to do now is take you into the dashboard itself, and as Francesca's mentioned, what we'd like to do is just refamiliarize yourself with some of those key features, some that you may have used a lot, some of them that you may have seen but not used yet, and some of this might be completely new to some of you as well. So let's, hopefully you can see my screen. Francesca, yeah, I can see Francesca, brilliant. So once again, based on the onboarding webinar, this is a default account. It's dummy data. It's just for the purposes of today's demo. Just a slight caveat is that it's not the best type of data, as in it doesn't really mimic what a club would receive from a huge pool of memberships, because we've only got 30 responses that sit within it. However, for the purpose of today, hopefully it's going to help you become more aware of where you should start to look at important areas or least satisfied areas, and where you can actually overlay some of the other filter scores and also some of the other lists, for example, comments, where you can find your volunteer recruitment list and also sponsorship recruitment list. So for the intended purpose of today, it should be relevant. However, it might not look exactly like yours, and actually your results are obviously specific to the club, but I'm hoping it will just give you some bearings around the results view. It's probably also worth mentioning that there are a lot of resources that sit within the Scottish Golf website, specifically around the features of Players First. There is a webinar that you can actually look at directly on the results view as well. So if you want a refresh or slightly more detail on some of these features, that's always available for you to access, and it's about 5 minutes long. If you want that bite size kind of snapshot on the features, it's definitely worth taking an explore around that area. And I believe that link to those resources has been shared previously, and we'll also follow up with a reminder of it. So the key features that I'll take you through today, and I'll spend most of the time on the default view in your results view, which is this priority map. The other features I'll take you through will also be the rankings view, and then we'll dip into the development view, which might be relevant for your clubs in the future. I'll also take you through some of those reporting areas that Francesca's already mentioned in terms of the results export, and also some of those additional resources that have already been created. And I already know that some clubs have started to make use of them and will continue to do that. So if you don't know about them, or you want to kind of access those resources in future, then feel free to reach out to Francesca or directly to myself, and we can talk you through those. So the priority map, which I hope that isn't too comprehensive to understand initially, but the basis of it is trying to analyze your results in a very straightforward way, which is highlighting the areas that are either most important to your members or they're the least satisfied with by your members. The y-axis, which is your score, is up to 100. And the reason for that is because any of your touch point scores can have a score between 0 and 100. So if you're getting a score of anything up to close of 100, then your members are very, very satisfied with it. The x-axis, which is along the bottom, is the potential impact on Net Promoter Score for that particular touch point. As I've mentioned, these are all specific to your member results. So an area of importance at your club might be completely different at another club, and it's likely to be that way. So in this example of this demo account, if I hover over this touch point here, so let's ignore the color coding for now, but this touch point, which is the club in general, is the furthest right touch point on this importance score. And it also happens to be one of the lowest service areas as well. So if I am a club and I'm looking at my results for the first time, I would hopefully deduce that the club in general is one of the key service areas that our club should actually look into making sense of, understanding what specifically around the club in general is either the most important or the least satisfied, and then understanding through the use of your open text comments more about the specific touch points in the club in general. So I hope that's given you a vague idea of what this priority map is starting to show. Now, if we look at the color coding that has been overlaid on certain touch points, if we look at this priority map can be identified by touch point level as well as service area level. The reason this is useful is because you can then start to highlight the key questions or the key touch points that your members are either least satisfied with or are most important to your members. So you'll now see that we've got some color-coded red, some color-coded orange, a couple of blues, and in some instances, clubs will see some purple touch points. The allocation of this color category is really just to give you kind of that RAG result. So your red, amber, greens, and also your overperformings. So whilst the actual category names might be quite severe, what we're trying to do is suggest that if you've got some red categories that are very important, these should instantly be the ones that kind of open your eyes up to exploring some more and really understanding if you can start to take some actions or investments or some changes in that particular area, then hopefully you're likely to have a bigger impact on improving your members' overall experience by focusing on some of these key important areas. Now, it's always worth looking at some of the lower scores, even if they have low importance. And that is why some of these categories are highlighted red as well. Because whilst if you just looked at your scores, you'd instantly want to focus on your lowest scores anyway. But actually, that's where the importance can hopefully shift some of that focus. However, it should be considered that if you've got low scores, or particularly low scores in certain areas, that they should probably have some focus as well, because there could be some quick wins. There could be some issues that you're aware of that actually you didn't realise that they were that least satisfied with them. But even if they've got low importance, it's always good to improve that baseline level of any of your scores. So I'll just dip back into the service area level. And potentially from a club perspective, when you're looking at your set of results for the first time, to take on board one service area level that either has a very low score or a very high importance. So again, in this example for the data that we have, the club in general is a low score, but it has a medium importance. But it's also the most important of any of these service areas in this example. So to deep dive a bit into what within the club in general could be potentially some actions built off the back of it, I can click into the club in general, and this now highlights the touch points specifically within the club in general section. And what you may have seen now, there's less touch points because these are the specific service areas, but it will now hopefully then get your interest into, okay, the most important touch point within the club in general is the main committee. So the effectiveness around your committee might be something that you did or didn't know your members were satisfied with or not. But what we now know is that it is important to your members. If I hover along, this one says the club's management listens when members make suggestions and new ideas. It's a very low score. It's the next most important. So if I was a club manager and I wanted to maybe share some of this back to the board or the committee, the actions that you could create around this will be to do with opportunities for members to give feedback and opportunities for the management committee to actually respond to those. With regards to being effective, they're quite linked actually. So kind of creating that fluid opportunity for members to interact with management, but also to be able to then share back actions or investments or strategies to actually, okay, say what you've achieved and then what your next steps might be. So they're just a couple of examples where data might be kind of a surprise to you, but it might be something that you're well aware of. You've now got this data to underpin those decisions and also start to create meaningful action plans off the back of that. And I personally believe there's no reason why these can't then be shared, obviously, outside of the committee back to your members to say, well, this has been highlighted from yourselves in our survey results, and this is now what we're proactively going to do or to change within that touch point. In the evaluation section on the left-hand side, obviously this is within the club in general itself. If I scroll to the bottom, there's a category that is silver or grey, and that's saying without priority. In this instance, it doesn't have priority because there aren't enough responses to those particular questions. So that's why they don't feature on the map. But if there were more responses to these questions, you would have more touch points populating that priority map as well. And if I scroll down further, there might be further questions that sit within each service area that, for example, wouldn't feature on a priority map because they are multiple choice questions. So this question is, the club should have a business plan that has been developed in consultation with members. And this is on a 5-point agree and disagree scale. So in this example, once again, it's got very low response numbers, but you can see that 65% of members have suggested they either agree or strongly agree to this business plan. And I'm pretty sure that that will be an overwhelming result from your members as well. So as I say, those further questions feature if you've got further questions in your service areas, it's definitely worth scrolling through to actually see all of the data that's available. If I flip over to the right-hand side, which many of you have used and actually find extremely useful when looking at your different golfer groups, the filter options will provide the score. So at the moment, I've got the score selected. This is the score that the females or males or under 18s or 76 plus years have given for the respective question that is highlighted. For example, the Net Promoter Score, your club's average score is in the middle at the top. In this example, it's 3, so it's just above 0. But the male average is 33 and the female average is -20. So it gives you a very quick snapshot of any of the similarities or differences between your golfer groups for that particular question. And as an observational point, if you do have quite contrasting scores, in this example, the females are much less satisfied with the club overall. So again, with my club manager's hat on, I would probably look to understanding more about the female importance scores, where they're less satisfied with than the males, and also then look at the comments that any females have provided to say, okay, this would make my experience better at the club, or in respect to any of the touch points that are particularly important to females. So the way to do that is I can click on female and that becomes the filter for the scores in the priority map. Again, it's not the best example to show, but this would create a priority map for your female members. And that will give you an understanding of maybe what they find more important or where they are actually less satisfied. So these are worth really understanding if there's particular golfer groups within your membership that have either a very high satisfaction, so what can you do more of for your members, or a very low satisfaction. So, okay, this group is quite important to our club because it represents a lot of members. What can we do specifically for them? And it might be gender, it might be age, it might be handicap group. I will caveat that your high or your lower handicappers will always be less satisfied with the course than your slightly higher handicappers. But there probably won't be a huge amount of 5 and under. Again, bad example, but you'd normally see kind of under 10% of your members responding will be 5 or below, and you'll get the vast majority that sit between 13 and 28 handicap, for example. So it's worth identifying the differences in scores, but then really understanding if that score is significant to the majority of your members. So don't go completely radicalizing your golf course or the bunkers or the green speed based off the dissatisfaction of the 5 or below handicappers, because it might only represent 5 or 8% of your members. However, it's all valid feedback, and there could be some changes that you could actually start to make or implement based on their specific feedback. So that's how I would flip between, okay, appreciating where the differences are in scores, and then using that distribution filter to interpret if that's a significant amount of your members or different golfer groups. So in a nutshell, that's the priority map. And I've mentioned about overlaying some of those or understanding more about the important factors or the lowest scoring factors using your comments. And these feature in the list view, which is the clipboard icon in the top right-hand side. This example, there are some comments, but as you'll see, it's a bit gobbledygook. However, for the purpose of this example, and just to show you a bit more about how the comment section works, you can use these filter icons to actually flip between the open text comments within the service areas that appear. So if you just wanted to understand more about F&B, you can select F&B, and then you can either read all the responses here, or you can use a key search term to find out if they've mentioned food, if they've mentioned service, probably won't be any comments in this example, if it might be about price. So you can use this key search term feature in the comment view itself. If, however, you want to do this on the go, or you want to share it around within different departments, you can use the export to Excel function and also search within Excel itself. You can do it offline. Just remember to either reset all the filters or click out of it. And whilst I'm in here as well, in this list view, in the top left-hand corner, this is where you can access your lists of your members who have either suggested that they are interested in volunteering at your club or have an interest in sponsoring your club. So if you have those two questions turned on in your survey, you'll be able to get the list of your members with the area that they might be interested in volunteering in, along with their contact information. And I would highly recommend that you download those lists and communicate back to those willing volunteers, because there's nothing worse than suggesting that you're happy to give some help and support back to your club and not hear anything. So some clubs set up a kind of working group or an initial introduction to those new volunteer groups. And obviously with sponsorship at this crucial time, if you're lucky enough to receive any sponsorship opportunities, I'd be biting their hand off, to be honest. So really find out what they'd be interested in, having a meaningful partnership together, but definitely remember to go into this list space and really make use of kind of this engagement that you've had in addition to the feedback from your volunteers. So just jumping back now into the results view. And one of the additional features that we have, and one of these automated reports that Francesca's mentioned, is this function here, which is an export of your scores in Excel against the current national benchmark or against the benchmark that you've got selected. So my date range I have selected between the 1st of January and the 31st of July, but you might actually take in the whole year. So it might go from the 1st of January up until present day, and that just widens the benchmark a bit more and captures in a few more responses. So I'm just going to try and share my screen so that you can see what this report looks like. Okay. Can you see that, Francesca? You can? Yeah, thank you. So the Players First Country Club, our demo club that has 30 responses. Any question that was turned on and has responses to features in column A. My club score features in column B, and the benchmark that you had selected at the time of the export features in column C. So at a glance, you can see if the club is higher or lower than the benchmark in certain areas. So interestingly, my club has a score of 3. The benchmark at the time was 37. So I can already interpret that before I see the breakdown that I have less promoters than the rest of the benchmark. So that's coming through quite strongly. I have 43% members who are promoters, but the benchmark has 52. Anything that's a percentage has been a multiple choice question or a split interval question. Whereas if I scroll down into the specific service area questions, these are just a score out of 100. So that's why some are percentages and some are a score. If I wanted to see at a glance, or I wanted to share this report because it's quite interesting to see where you're above or below the benchmarks, you can add in a formula and have my club score minus the benchmark score. Okay, we're actually, any negative score means that the club score is lower than the benchmark. So it might be easier to recognize if it's a minus number, and actually where you're much lower than the benchmark could be quite significant. So fairways in this example, the speed of greens, and the greens are smooth and the ball rolls as it should. These are all quite significantly under the benchmark score. However, I would always suggest that you look at the importance of these areas, because if the speed of the greens isn't an important aspect, it's just a little lower than the benchmark, then it might not be an area that you should think about taking too much action or too much investment in. So these are quite useful to download as soon as you've got your final or complete set of responses, because what it does is gives you a final overview of the questions that you asked in the template, and obviously your final scores and the benchmark at the time. The first tab gives you a bit of an overview, so that if you saved it and you couldn't remember the dates, etc., it gives you the dates that you've collected, and also a bit more about the number of invitations and responses that are using to populate the report. Okay, that was really all I was going to drill into for the dashboards, kind of the interactivity with the dashboard. But we did think it would be worthwhile just discussing some of these template reports. I didn't know if there are any questions to jump into on the dashboard before I completely remove myself from that today.
If you do have questions, you can pop them in the Q&A. I'm aware that some people joined us just after we started. So there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you can just pop your questions in there. One was right up at the top from Joe, was just to explain a little bit more about the NPS, Net Promoter Score, and what that essentially is. So generally in marketing communications, it's a way of aggregating the way that people talk about your company, organization, brand, and it looks at all your promoters and all of your detractors and all the people who are neutral, sort of passive in the middle, and then takes a net score. And it's something for you to benchmark against year on year or month on month, or however it is that you want to calculate that. I think in your case, Amelia, in this platform, it just looks at the survey. So it looks at all of those red touch points, orange touch points, orange points, and then calculates a score from there.
So the Net Promoter question, as you said, it is a standalone question in the survey. So actually that score is calculated the same way as John Lewis would calculate an NPS, or Amazon or BA. So this is the response to a standalone question that is very common, as I say. So yeah, the Net Promoter Score is it can have a score from -100. So if all of your members were detractors and gave you a score of 0 to 5, or you could have a +100 score. So if all of your members gave you a score with their overall satisfaction with the club is 9 or 10, that's how you would get that 100 score. So by taking the promoters away from the detractor scores, that gives you that NPS in between.
That's right. I think kind of across industries, I think generally anything above 70 or 75 is considered pretty good. But obviously you'll want to benchmark your own club's Net Promoter Score against maybe previous results, or and track your progress through there. So obviously every club and every sector is slightly different. Any more questions? I've just got one. Just interestingly, when you talked about the benchmark, How is that? What are the parameters for those benchmarked scores? Are they national average, or are they other respondents to the same survey? What are the parameters that we're kind of comparing against?
Yes, so within the Scottish Golf clubs, the national benchmark that they have access to is the Scottish Golf specific national benchmark. At the moment, it's based on, I'll just jump in and share my screen again. So at the moment, you can see the number of clubs that sit within your benchmark by using that rankings view. So the benchmark that in this example is being calculated off 6 other clubs, including our club, that have a score to the question. So if that question isn't turned on, the benchmark pool is a bit lower. But that's why the template, having a standardized template, is really useful, because it gives you more benchmarking opportunities across more questions. So yeah, that benchmark at the moment in the Scottish Golf accounts is a Scottish Golf club score. We do have a couple of other default benchmarks that will be available if clubs continue to use the benchmark themselves, the platform, in the future. And also, if we get to a critical level of clubs launching across Scotland, we'll also by default be able to add in a regional benchmark as well. More into the future, if there's more clubs with the same number of holes or the same facility types, those types of benchmarks will also become default, but we can't offer those until we have a certain number of clubs to aggregate to create those benchmarks. So at the moment, that national benchmark is building nicely. So it's gone from 1,000 responses back in June to nearly 4,500 responses, kind of reaching mid-November, where we are now. And hopefully that will continue to increase over the winter months, with at least 4 other clubs launching. And it's also a relatively good time of year. It's a popular time of year for clubs to launch, because they can start to take some actions through into the renewal cycle. With out of season kind of less visitors, potentially there is more headspace to really unpick this data and drill down into some of those important areas.
So just following on from that, we've had a question come in. If there isn't a benchmark figure to compare with, how would you go about assessing the result?
Yeah, it's a good question. The assessment also comes intrinsically from the club. So based on other responses that you think, okay, we assume that we would be here and we are here. So as a club, you'd hopefully know that if things are way off and kind of hadn't been considered, or if actually things are as assumed, what the data is doing is giving you that kind of springboard to actually think about, do we need to make those changes? Are they important? And where do we want to get that level or that score to in future? So benchmarks are a really tangible data point to have for an initial survey. This development view, if you use the same survey again within kind of the subscription, you can actually see the difference in your scores over time. So if, for example, a club launched in February and they want to do another round of surveying in December, let's say, if they've made specific changes in areas that they want to track, then this is where that development view comes into play. So even if there wasn't a benchmark score across Scotland, you might have a data point that you are now comparing yourself against yourself, which you could consider almost more important to the club. So yes, there should be benchmarks for the majority of questions now. So if that's not the case, hopefully there will be in the near future. But yeah, the benchmarking is a really good data point to have initially to kind of see where you are. If you're always bottom or always top, you're kind of doing something right. If you're in between, there might be areas that you actually want to focus on and jump up those rankings and jump above the benchmark. But if there's no benchmark now, then hopefully there will be.
Lovely, thanks, Amelia. Do you want to jump into the report, back into the reporting template, and we'll take some more questions at the end.
Let's do that. Okay. So I know that some of you have seen this before, and I've also engaged with some clubs to kind of help work your way through this report template. I have noticed it's not a resource that we have on the Scottish Golf resources area yet, but I'm sure we can make it available, or we can definitely share this as an attachment following on from this webinar. So what we've tried to create is a very basic overview of some of your key top line headlines that you might want to share back either to your board, to your committee, or actually share back to members if you wanted to. Anything that's highlighted, green or yellow, this is information that we've suggested might be relevant for you to populate based on your final set of results. So identifying the year you've produced the report, the name of your golf club, obviously, customizing it slightly, and then actually giving you a snapshot of, okay, when were our responses received, how many did we get, what our response rate was like, and then a bit about, okay, our Net Promoter Score, which we've talked about its importance in interpreting your members' importance of certain areas, but you can actually kind of highlight that your NPS, let's say of 57, at that point in time might be plus 13 above the national benchmark. So it's really just a snapshot in time of your scores versus some of the other areas or scores that the benchmark's showing. There's a couple of kind of info or pointers here that you might want to add. Okay, what are our filters here? So do we have more members that are likely to stay versus the benchmark? Some of those top line data points that I shared at the start of this session, you might want to just kind of capture in this top line report. If I scroll to the next page, this example, so we're suggesting that it might be worthwhile just taking a screenshot of your priority map. So underneath here, you can see that it will then capture the score that you got for the service area, and then understanding those color coding, you can revert back to this image. So if you weren't online, you could actually make sense of what this data point was furthest right, based on the color coding and the scores that you've captured in that screenshot. This is some information text, so that's why nothing's highlighted in there, and it's just helping you interpret what the dashboard, what the priority map is displaying. Underneath, we've suggested that you can kind of highlight the number of service areas. So when I talk about a service area, that's an aggregated score for things like the course, club life, the pro shop, booking systems. But if you actually focus on kind of 3 sections or service areas within this report, you might suggest that it was the course and the club life that were showing up in need of attention, or that red category. So what we're understanding is that the focus of the report might be understanding what within the course and the club life you're looking at taking actions on, or looking at the comments to really understand what it is the members are saying about it. Which leads me on to the next page. So let's say the course, within the course scores, what areas are those 2, 3, 4 red highlighted areas? If there aren't that many red, then you might also introduce some of those orange areas. So the next category of importance. And this blurb will actually, it needs to come from your understanding of your members' score, overlaying it with their comments, and actually where you think the management, the department, or kind of working with your greenskeepers, what the priority areas could be, and then what actions could be taken, or who will start to think about having responsibility of increasing that experience. There might be 3 or 4 service areas or touch points that you want to drill down into, in which case you could just copy and paste that slide and introduce a few more into the report. So it's really just, this is a way that we've given as an example to highlight some of the key touch points within a specific service area. And on the final page, this is dipping into that member loyalty that we've discussed initially. So let's suggest that 63% of your members have said that they will be a member here in 2 years' time. In this example, it's slightly higher than the benchmark, which is a good thing. But actually, we want this 11% to be a lot less. Regardless of this number, all clubs should want more members to say yes or maybe rather than no. So let's consider, as I say, if there are 10 members that said they won't be a member here in 2 years' time, what is that potential loss that the club are considering looking at in future? Staring down the barrel of the gun, we are going to be losing £1,000 if we don't take some actions to try and prevent these members from leaving. So an example of where it might be useful to look at in the dashboard is looking at the reasons these members who have said, no, we're not likely to be a member, okay, why are they going to leave the club? What are they suggesting? And it might be that it's a natural churn reason. They might be too old to continue to play in 2 years' time. They might be moving away or changing jobs. There's limiting kind of actions that a club can take to prevent those things from happening. So what are the club-related matters that members are suggesting or are common in thinking that these members are saying they would leave? Is it the management? Is it no access to tea times? What are their frustrations? And then understanding, okay, what can the club do about them? Seriously, how can the club consider improving these metrics to reduce this number of members? And that's really why this has a specific kind of slide by itself or page by itself, because it is quite important for clubs to understand the reasons why members might leave the club in future. So we're happy to kind of take on critique on this report. It's quite generic to kind of make it appropriate and quite easy for clubs to actually digest and share. There isn't one size fits all though, I can appreciate that. So it is available. I'd welcome feedback to this. And I'm also happy that if you want to have a go at completing one of these and you want to just double check some numbers or you're not sure where to find them, please do get in touch and we can help you populate these and make the most of interpreting and analysing your feedback and sharing it back to your committee and back to your members. So again, this is a generic draft. We'll make it available to you. The kind of next step beyond that, and I've talked about actions and action plans, we've also got a draft version of one of those. And I have this in Excel as well, if you want to have something online. But once you've really identified in the report or through the dashboard, the service areas of importance and the service areas that you're actually going to challenge yourselves to improve, okay, can you identify maybe 2 touch points within the course that your greenskeepers teams might take on as a responsibility? You could plug in the score that those are currently getting out of 100. So let's suggest the green speed and the fairway condition, the current score that you've received from your members today, and then look to actually create some objectives to actually improve that by a percentage or achieve a certain score in future. I can appreciate it's difficult to kind of test on kind of one survey launch, but as a general idea, kind of capturing these action points so that you can confidently talk about them in your strategies, you can confidently give updates to your members. It's just an idea to be able to capture some of those actions, assign responsibility as well, and also, yeah, understand, okay, when might we address that situation and take stock on where we're at with those improvements. So they're the kind of 2 follow-on resources that are available, drafted, quite generic to clubs, but hopefully a useful visual or aid to help you navigate through the back end of those final results.
Some really great feedback coming in the Q&A of for those templates, Amelia. So
okay.
whether or not they need tweaked, then I think they're providing a really good starting point anyway. That the kind of KPI sort of target document's really useful, because I think what happens when you start surveying your members is that a period of time goes by and then they wonder what's happened to the results. So it's a really useful thing to be able to demonstrate that not only are you asking for feedback, but you are actually putting in some action points and listening as well. There's nothing worse than being asked your opinion and then nothing happens about it. So the mere fact that you're communicating that there are points of progress is a win, really. We're sort of 10 minutes away from the hour, so I'm aware that everyone has busy lives to get on with. If you'd like, I'll just give a few minutes, another chance for you to ask any questions in the Q&A, or if you can't type in the Q&A, if you want to just raise your hand and I'll enable you to actually speak like a human being. So if you'd like to ask any questions, now's your chance. Amelia is very, very kindly very available to clubs who are already participating in this survey. So I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Amelia, when I say that you are available for questions kind of after the fact via email, and always really helpful to clubs who are struggling with a particular point, whether it's onboarding, activation, launching, whatever it might be. Amelia is on hand to answer your questions. We want to make this as smooth as possible for you. So are there any other questions on any aspect of that before we wrap up? Feel free to ask questions afterwards, of course. Nope. Okay. Lovely. Well, oh, here's one's come in. Here we go. Yes, Alistair, the templates will be available. We will share them with you. So what we will do is I will, once this webinar is complete, I will send round a follow-up email to all of you, copying Amelia in so that you've all got her email address if you don't already. The email will contain a link to this webinar, so you can revisit any of the things that Amelia said, and also links to other resources to do with onboarding or activation if you haven't already started your survey. And we will share these templates with you. Either Amelia will directly or I will find a way of getting them to you, and they should be fully editable and exportable for you to use as you want. Yeah, so that's what we'll do following this. Any other questions before we wrap up? Anything else from you, Amelia, just before we wrap up?
No, just I thank you all for your time and contributions so far. It's been fascinating hearing from clubs that have launched and using the custom questions and interpreting results. So yes, some clubs are really kind of going strong on this, and hopefully today's helping that kind of next step in that interpretation and follow up with the results. But if there are clubs that are yet to launch or think about launching again, yeah, revisit the onboarding webinar, or please feel free to contact me if you've got any questions or queries about setup or launch, and we can get you the most from then the member feedback that you get in future. Lovely. Well, thank you very much. Yes, thanks again for joining us. And as I say, there'll be a follow-up to this email very shortly in the next day or two. So have a good rest of the day, and thanks very much. And thank you, Amelia. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.